Hello students, I am teacher Svetlana and in our today's lecture we will learn about population, that is natality and mortality, age distribution and age structure, population growth and population interaction, which is covered in the chapter Organism and Populations. So let's begin. Population. In nature, we rarely find isolated single individuals. They live in group in a well-defined geographical area, share or compete for similar resources, potentially interbreed, and thus form a population. Although it is an individual organism that has to cope with the changes in the environment, it is at the population level that natural selection operates to evolve the desired traits. Population ecology is therefore an important area of ecology because it links ecology to population dynamics, genetics, and evolution. A population has certain attributes of its own, which are different from those of an individual. Basic physical characteristics of population are its size and density. Students, size speaks for the number of individuals in a population, while density tells us the number of individuals present per unit space in a given time. Besides size and density, the other characteristics include natality, mortality, immigration, emigration, age pyramids, expanding population, population growth, forms, and biotic potentials. An individual has birth and death, but a population has birth rate and death rate. So let us have a look at these terminologies. Natality is the birth rate of a population. It has the greatest influence on population growth. So it influences the growth of population, and natality is a crude birth rate or a specific birth rate. We have crude birth rate in which we use when calculating population size, number of births per thousand population per year, whereas specific birth rate is used relative to a specific criterion such as age. Absolute natality, the number of births under ideal conditions, that is with no competition, abundance of resources such as food and water, etc. Realized natality, the number of births when environmental pressure comes into play. It must be remembered that absolute natality will be always more than the realized natality. Then we have mortality. It is the death rate of a population. Mortality rate or death rate is a measure of the number of deaths in general or due to specific cause in a particular population in proportion to the size of that population per unit of time. Mortality rate is typically expressed in deaths per 1,000 individuals per year. Absolute mortality, the number of deaths under ideal conditions where we have no competition, abundance of resources such as food and water, etc. Realized mortality, the number of deaths when environmental pressure comes into play. It must be remembered again that the absolute mortality will always be less than the realized mortality. Sex ratio. The sex ratio of the population affects and is reciprocally affected by birth, death, immigration, and emigration rates. It is measured as the ratio of number of individuals of one sex to that of the another sex. The males and females in a ratio of 1:1 is generally the most common evolutionary stable strategy, ESS. Age distribution and age pyramid. A population is composed of individuals of different ages. If the age distribution, that is percentage individuals of a given age or age group, is plotted for the population, the resulting structure is called as an age pyramid. For the purpose of simplicity, the entire population is divided into three age groups as pre-reproductive, that is age group 0 to 14 years, reproductive age group 15 to 44 years, and post-reproductive, that is 45 to 85 and above years. The size of the population it can support tells us a lot about its status in the habitat. The population size in a natural habitat could be as low or as less than 10. Example, we have Siberian cranes in the bird sanctuary, or go into millions, that is Chlamydomonas in pond. Population size, more technically called as population density, designated as N, need not necessarily be measured in numbers only. Although total number is generally the most appropriate measure of population density, it is in some cases either meaningless or difficult to determine. In an area, if there are millions of termites or ants, but only a few animals which feed on them, stating that the population density of their predators is low will be misleading. In such cases, the biomass is the most meaningful measure of the population size. Total number is again not an easily adoptable measure. If the population is huge and counting is impossible or is very time consuming, at such times the biomass is used. Sometimes for certain ecological investigations, there is no need to know the absolute population densities. Relative densities serve the purpose equally well. Now, how are these relative densities calculated? For example, the tiger census in our national park and tiger reserve is often based on the pug marks and fecal pellets. So actually, they do not go and count the tigers in the jungle or the reserves. Now students, let us try to understand what is population growth. Now the size of the population for any species is a dynamic parameter. It keeps changing with time depending on various factors including food, predation pressure and adverse weathers. In fact, these changes in population density that give us some idea whether it is flourishing or whether the population is declining. Hence, density of a population in a habitat during a given period fluctuates due to changes in four basic processes. New births, denoted as B, and immigration contributes to an increase in the population density, that is, somebody from outside moving into a place. Deaths, denoted as D, and emigration leads to a decrease in the population density when a person leaves or an individual leaves the place or the habitat. Immigration I is the number of individuals of the same species that have come into the habitat from elsewhere during the time period under consideration. And immigration, that is E, is the number of individuals of the population who left the habitat during the same time period. So if n is the population density at time t, then its density at time t plus 1 can be calculated as. So basically here, if you have density at a given time and at a later stage, if you want to calculate what is the density, it can be calculated as the density at a later stage and the current density number that you have. To that, you can add the numbers that come here. Here you have to put a total of the number of births and the immigrants, that is the ones who have come from outside, the total of those minus the number of deaths and the ones who have left the habitat. So this number you can plus to the existing density number that you have to get the new density of the population. Population growth, we have exponential growth. Resources like food, space are essential for any growth of a population. Ideally, when resources in the habitat are unlimited, each species has the ability to realize its innate potentials to grow in numbers. Then the population grows in an exponential or a geometrical proportion. Every species capable of growing exponentially under unlimited resource conditions and reach enormous population densities in a short time. Darwin showed how even a slow growing animal like elephant could reach enormous numbers provided food and space remain unlimited. But resources like food and space are not always unlimited. So this is an exponential growth curve. So if all the conditions are favorable, you can have the population size increasing exponentially. But this doesn't always happen. There may be in the beginning that the conditions are ideal, but as the population density increases, so does the competition for those resources, resulting in the slowdown of the rate at which the original population was growing. This results in logistic or sigmoidal growth curve. So students, let us have a look at the logistic growth. Competition between individuals for limited resources will weed out the weaker ones. Only the fittest individual will survive and reproduce. In nature, a given habitat has enough resources to support a maximum possible number, beyond which no further growth is possible. Let us call this limit as nature's carrying capacity K for that species in that habitat. A population grows in a habitat, that is, a growing population of an habitat with limited resources show initially a lag phase, followed by a phase of acceleration and deceleration, and finally an asymptote, where the population density reaches the carrying capacity. A plot of graph density n in relation to time results in a sigmoidal curve. You can see this is the initial lag phase. Initially the growth is slow, then suddenly there is an exponential growth, and again there is diminishing in the growth phase. That's it becomes stationary. There is no further growth in the population. This type of population growth is called Verist Pearl logistic growth. Since resources for growth for most animal populations are finite and become limiting sooner or later, the logistic growth model is considered as the more realistic one. Under a particular set of selection pressures, organisms evolve towards the more efficient reproductive strategies. Now, in order to deal with this problem of resources, less availability of these resources, organisms, they evolve to having better reproductive strategies. That is, some produce a large number of small sized offsprings. For example, we have oysters and pelagic fishes, while others produce a small number of large size offsprings, example birds and mammals. Then we have something called as population interactions. Students, there is no natural habitat which has only one species or animals or plants. For any species, the minimal requirement is another species as food. Even a plant species which has photosynthetic abilities cannot survive alone. It needs soil microbes to break down the organic matter in the soil and release the inorganic nutrients. So it is obvious that in nature, animals, plants, and microbes do not and cannot live in isolation but interact in myriad ways to form a biological community. These interactions may be intraspecific, that is, existing between organisms of the same population, and interspecific between members of different species. The interspecific interaction occurs between minimum two organisms, that is, between two plants or two animals, or between a plant and an animal. Such interactions may be classified as four types, which are neutralism, that is negative, next is negative or harmful, positive or beneficial, and both positive and negative interactions. Even in simplest communities, many interactions exist. Not all may be seen easily. Interspecific interactions arise from the interactions of populations of two different species. These interactions could be beneficial, detrimental, or neutral, that is, neither harm nor benefit to one or both of the species. Students, there are various types of interactions and they are classified as per the nature of their interaction to one or both the species. Both the species are benefited in mutualism and both are harmed in competition. In parasitism and predation, only one species benefits, that is the parasite and the predator respectively. An interaction is detrimental to the other species, that is, it could be harmful or life-taking for the host and the prey respectively. The interactions where one species is benefited and the other is neither benefited nor harmed is called as commensalism. And in amensalism, On the other hand, one species is harmed whereas the other is unaffected. So there are a number of examples that are listed in your textbook to explain these interactions. Thank you students for participating in this lecture. See you soon again with the next topic.